Today we're going through section 1.5 of the CompTIA Security Plus, going through vulnerability scanning concepts. Hi everybody, welcome to StudioSec. Thank you for watching. Like this video if it's helpful. Comment down below if you're studying for the CompTIA Security Plus, and subscribe for more content. I'm posting more of this content and other content every single week. Last time we talked about the CompTIA Security Plus, we talked about penetration testing concepts. Well, now we're going to be talking about vulnerability scanning concepts. So here's a link to that video, and then I'll have a link right after it up above and down below for the CompTIA Security Plus playlist. Let's jump in. Now, the first thing we're going to be looking at is passively testing security controls. And this really ties into the concept we talked about last time, which is passive testing. So this really means that we're just looking for information without actually touching the target. This just means we're going to be just doing some scans, nothing crazy. We're not looking to actually, interrogate any particular host that we find. We're not looking to make any kind of network content or contact in any significant way. Maybe the most we'll do is a quick ping, just kind of see what's being broadcast onto the network. And that's it. We're really just trying to check and see what's there. We're not looking to really produce any noise for the most part. Now, some of the information that you'd be looking for would be operation system information, what kind of ports are open, what kind of services are being run on those ports, what version those services might be. That's a very important one. If they have any ports open that aren't running any services, and even if you can find any kind of interconnectivity. So like if you're doing any kind of passive network sniffing, like you turn on Wireshark and you're just trying to see what kind of communication is going on the network, that could count here. Now, the next thing will be identify vulnerability. These next few points are actually pretty straightforward. Obviously, identifying a vulnerability. You've identified a vulnerability. Congratulations, you found a vulnerability. That means that it's something that there's an exploit out there for it. There's a way for an attacker with any level of sophistication, strength, or persistence. They could exploit that vulnerability and gain unauthorized access to the system or information on the system. Next point, identifying lack of security controls. That would be if there's just no security controls on a particular system. So let's say you're checking to see if there's a firewall and there's no firewall. You found lack of security controls. You found a lack of a firewall. That's probably a really important finding you would want to report to the network administration team. Next would be identify common misconfiguration. Now, there are lots of misconfigurations out there in the world that are quite common, and that's kind of one of the reasons why attackers are able to exploit them, is because they're common. And so obviously you want to make sure that you're not falling into those pitfalls. If you're a network admin, you want to make sure that you are configuring devices, following best practices both for efficiency and security. And if you are doing a vulnerability scan and you find a common misconfiguration, that's something you should report as well. Next is intrusive and non-intrusive vulnerability scanning. And this is something that can get kind of confusing here. So intrusive scanning is you're actually actively trying to exploit vulnerabilities. So, and in some ways you can actually try to script it. It may not actually succeed all the time, but if you have a program or an application running that is scanning and it has a bunch of exploits already loaded up for specific vulnerabilities that it finds, it will test that exploit and see if it works, and then it will note that in the report. And that's obviously something you want to know. So that would be an intrusive scan. You are trying to see what works. Maybe you'll find a vulnerability that an exploit doesn't work. And just because it doesn't work doesn't mean it wouldn't work for the attacker, but it's something that would be noted. But obviously exploits that do work will be noted differently. So you're gonna wanna make sure that you are not doing an intrusive vulnerability scan whenever the scope is in a non-intrusive vulnerability scan. And what that is you're just doing scans. You're not testing exploits on vulnerabilities. You're just doing some checks on the information that's available on the network. So like Nmap would be an example there. Maybe a ping, maybe some Wireshark. You're not trying to do anything crazy. You're just checking to see what's there, what information you can gather on the network. Next is going to be credentialed versus non-credentialed, and this can be a nice way to see what kind of abilities you can have if you have a certain permission set. So if you have a non-credentialed vulnerability scan, then that will kind of give you an assessment on what a complete outsider with zero access will be able to see if they're doing different kinds of scans and what kind of vulnerabilities might be available if that happens. Now, if you're doing a credentialed scan, that will give you a certain level of permissions and access into the system, and then you run the scan from that perspective, and that will give you escalating tiers of information whenever it comes to your vulnerability scan. Next point is going to be a false positive, but I'm also going to include false negative because both are important. A false positive is whenever something is reported on a vulnerability scan that basically the scan says that, hey, this is something that happened, when in fact that is not something that happened. Maybe it read a certain level of conditions that, hey, when these conditions are met, flag an alert and say, hey, this event's going on. Well, that may not always necessarily mean that event's happening. So that would constitute a false positive. A false negative happens whenever certain conditions are to be met and an event happens and it doesn't flag it. So in a real world scenario, we'll say that an exploit works on a vulnerability and an IDS sees that and it flags it and alerts the staff. That would be a successful alert. Let's say a vulnerability is exploited and the IDS does not flag it. That is a false negative. Something clearly happened, but the IDS did not catch it. Or on the flip side, let's say the IDS says that something happened, but no vulnerability was exploited. So, those are some things you want to keep an eye out. Personally, I would say better safe than sorry. Just make sure that you're tying up all loose ends. Just because you see a false positive or just because you see something on the report, never assume it's a false positive. Always assume something to be true until you can prove it's a false positive. So with all that, it's a pretty quick section on Security Plus. Like this video if it's helpful. Comment down below with your thoughts on vulnerability scans and subscribe for more content. I'm producing a study guide for Security Plus. Maybe that's something you'd be interested in. I don't know. See ya.